Check. Audio check.
Full round trip.
Live stream audio check. 1, 2.
Okay. All right, everybody, this is your 10-minute warning before the seminar starts upstairs on the second floor. Please finish up your beverage. We've got a recycling can at the end of the path where you can throw your can on your way in. And we're really glad you're here. If you have a couple bucks in your pocket and want to leave a donation for the snacks and the alcohol, that'd be amazing. Again, we're so glad you're here. Thank you. 10 minutes.
Give it a second. I'm restarting.
Check. Check.
All right.
Say something, a couple things.
1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1.
Cool. Check. Check. Check, check. Testing. Check.
Check, check. Testing, testing.
Check, check. Check, check. Testing,
I'm not
testing.
hearing it. All right. I can hang on.
Check one. All right, 1 second. I'll be right back. Test, test. Oh, there's something. Wait. Live stream check. So sorry.
That's going through
I hear a lot of noise.
There it is. Okay, so turn that off.
Check.
There we go.
Hello. I think I'm hearing people. Our lovely participants. Hey, look at that. Okay.
Raise your hand if you can hear me. 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 How's that? Hello everyone. My name is Jill Keenert. I'm the campus director here at REEF in Key Largo. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. We have a busy week ahead of us. Let's skip right to the announcements. This week we have Fish and Friends happening on campus here in Key Largo. The first year we're going to have all of the activities, well, almost all of the activities right here, including ocean seminars right in this very room. We're going to have some amazing speakers who are experts in things like cave diving and aquariums and sharks and what's the third one? There's citizen science. We always have a great speaker on citizen science. So I hope you all, whether you're joining us online or here in the room, are planning to come back for the open house, which starts on Thursday evening, and for the seminars, which are Friday afternoon and Saturday afternoon. And in Saturday evening, we're also having a very special dinner. There's still some tickets available if you want to join us for any of these. Click the QR code or come talk to us, and we'd love to have you here for that. But making sure that our audio visual and our streaming and all of those things are working in tip-top shape is important for that. So thank you for your patience as we get started here this evening. Trips are an amazing thing that we do here at REEF. I'm sorry my colleague Stacy's not in the room. I was going to shout him out. One of our remote staff that's in here for the week of REEF Fest is Stacy. He's our trips manager, but we have amazing opportunities to take a dive vacation that counts, as we call it. 13 or 14 trips a year around the world in all kinds of world areas. It's a great way to explore the massive biodiversity that we have in our oceans with fellow fish nerds. So I hope you'll check it out if that's something that sounds interesting to you. And the 2026 locations are up there and ready to go. We have 2 more Fish and Friends events. So we're always on the second Tuesday of the month. In November, we're going to have a talk about shark depredation in the Florida Keys, which should be really interesting with an expert from the Tarpon and Bonefish Trust. And then, who are those people? On December 9th, which is the second Tuesday in December, we're having our annual holiday party. Instead of having a speaker, we'll have some fun activities. And so I hope you'll put that on your calendar for December if you're still here for that. We also, every Tuesday night, we're actually open after hours here in the center. The rest of the Tuesdays in October, after this one, on October 21st, we're having a Smile Citizen Science Night. Is Jen in the room? Yeah? And you're going to be giving that talk, right? Or that? Okay, great. So if you've ever wondered what is Smile, how does REEF use recreational divers using special cameras to identify the length of fish that are important to us, I hope you'll join us next Tuesday for that and learn more. And then October 28th, we have a super fun pumpkin painting. So it's BYOP, bring your own pumpkin, and we'll have a lot of fun with ocean-themed pumpkin painting activities, I think. So it's a lot of fun for all ages here in the community. This event is made possible, as is free admission to this center every day, thanks to generous support of our donors. So if you have already, and I know many people in this room are longtime supporters of REEF, we thank you for that. If you haven't yet, here's an easy way to do it by scanning this QR code, and you're helping us reach our audiences. And last but not least, we're still getting the word out about this new center. I go a lot out in the community, and I always ask people to raise their hands if they've been to the new center or not, and I get surprised every time because I feel like everybody's been here. We've had a busy couple of months, but I know even some people who are good friends of ours are still making their way here. So if you leave a review, if you're active on Google or TripAdvisor or Yelp and care to leave a review for the center, it really helps out to get the word out. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the stage over to Gary Davis, who's a retired biologist with the National Park Service. And first time to my knowledge, we would have to ask Jane, or maybe Nancy, you know, have we ever had a talk that had a Jimmy Buffett song title as part of it? I don't think so. But Gary and I were just talking, and we thought there's a whole slew of very interesting talks a person could do using Jimmy Buffett song titles as an inspiration. So here we are, the increasing values of national parks in America, or how are you going to tell how it used to be when there's nothing left to see? Gary sadly is not going to be singing the song for us either. I also asked him about that. But thanks for being here. Please help me welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Well, thank you all for showing up, and thank you to the REEF Environmental Education Foundation for inviting me to share some of my experiences as a scientist helping to conserve national parks, keep them safe. And as the title suggests, there's less and less space that looks like a national park, which makes them more and more valuable. But there are some other things that are going on that I wanted to share with you today to talk about that. And one of the things that I don't think very many people know about is that there are at least 80 national parks in the ocean, United States national parks. And in addition to the sanctuary programs, right? So we got partners, and we don't usually think about oceans and national parks. So I hope we change that today. You should get another feel for that. So what I'd like to do first is give you the briefest overview of my career with the national parks, so you kind of see where I've been and what I've been doing. People are always interested in that for some reason. And then introduce the tenets of what it takes to keep a national park running. How are we going to pass this on to the next generation intact, unimpaired, which is the goal for the national park system. And close with a few short stories about how we do that. And those stories that I've chosen for today will start, we have to start with the first park in Yellowstone. So, you can't do this without mentioning Yellowstone somehow. It's fun to kind of bring that into play. But then we'll focus on South Florida parks. Because we're here, right? So we've got Dry Tortugas and Everglades, all of Florida Bay and the West Coast, and Biscayne National Park. Right? So there's some great stories here to tell, and I think that you may not know all of them, but we'll find out. We'll see. Maybe you can add to my version of the story a little bit. And then there's California that also has some underwater parks. So we'll do that. That's kind of where I think that we're going to go today. That's what this is about. Now, to sustain parks, we need to master a few really basic things about park stewardship. And it's very similar to human health management or human medicine. Parks need emergency room-like skills, or EMTs, for things like oil spills or disasters of that sort. Parks need the primary physician's diagnostic skills to figure out what's going on, to be able to treat invasive species infections, right? Where things like lionfish show up from somewhere, or other kinds of things like that. Species are moving around the globe like they've never moved before. And so you need to have some ability to do that sort of thing. And you need somebody that does the basic research, that develops the tools that you need to take care of these things, like developing vaccines for people we have to figure out how we're going to deal with all of these issues. So those are the sorts of things that are going on that I wanted to share with you a little bit. Now, there's no doubt that the extraordinary scenery and the historic events that are the introductory hooks, that's the reason that people remember parks, they go to parks. But that's really just getting you in the front door. That's really what that's about. The national parks and the system offers us far more than that stunning scenery and the memorable vacations that we've had there. They also collectively function as the fundamental operating manual for the planet. They keep us alive. They're the only places where we can figure out how this place works. The very, very basic things of where we get our air, the oxygen that we breathe, and water, and without the ocean producing all of the oxygen that it does, we wouldn't be here. As you've got that quote from Sylvia on the wall in here, and people don't think about that very much. But the parks also help us remember the past, because they can remind us of what it used to be. Jimmy's quote. They are places where we can remember what it was like. And they also allow us to look to the future. Very interesting in that they are the last best places where you can learn how things could be. And in a sense, that's a way to get at the future. So these parks are visually valuable, yes, but a solid scientific understanding of how they work is essential if we're going to get all of the value out of the parks, if we're going to figure out how they actually work, and if we can perpetuate those values for other people. So the fact of the matter is, the parks are the last best places on Earth to experience our legacy, humanity's legacy here. It's what we had when we started with this. And these parks serve as that fundamental operating manual that we desperately need to have as we're altering the systems around us for humanity. They provide us with all of those things that we talked about, oxygen, food, and water. It's fundamental. And the problem is that there's no tech support to call, right? And even if we did, they'd probably tell us RTFM, right? Read the fundamental manual, or some other acronym that sounds like that. So to aid in our survival, we need to ensure that parks provide all the values that they possess. We've got to get everything we can out of these places. It's a good investment. And yeah, it's far greater than the scenic facades alone, no matter how beautiful they may be. And this scene right here is one of the most beautiful. It is one of the most photographed scenery or scenes anywhere in the national park system. It's the St. Mary Lake in Glacier National Park up in Montana. And this is a place, not only is it beautiful, but this is the place that evidence shows us very clearly that members of the Blackfoot Confederacy believe that that's where their ancestors first emerged on the surface of the earth. On that little island right there in the middle in front of the boat, that's where people came. It's just like the Garden of Eden for another group of people that are convinced that that's where it happened. And we have those places all over the planet with different groups of people. Right? So how are we supposed to know our place in the universe? Where did we come from? What are those things about, right? To understand our place, we depend on science and reason also to better understand and predict how and why these things benefit our societies. Uh-oh. I've lost my way forward.
Those are big questions. How do we find our place?
Yes, yeah, broke the system. There we go. All right. So, speaking of points of origin, As soon as I could walk, my mother took me to the tide pools in San Diego in California. She thought it would give me confidence for walking, and it also took a lot of burden off of her trying to keep up with me because the tide pools slowed me down, but we just spent hours out there chasing around, and it was just fabulous, and I still remember it. I still go visit those places. And by the age of 12, I'd acquired some open water swimming skills and then learned to surf. And so my dad thought it was safe to take me in a boat, so we went out fishing in the kelp forest off of Point Loma to catch some small game fish. And one of my father's friends worked on a sport fishing boat, and he asked my dad if I could go with him and work as a deckhand with him. And so I thought, well, that's going to be fun. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, I just fell in love with it, thought that was going to be my life. So I worked on the sport fishing boats in San Diego, catching California yellowtail and marlin, tuna, and for paying passengers, right? And 7 summers from 57 to 63. And we worked 7 days a week for 3 months. Long days, 2 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. It was hard work, but it was exciting. It was a transformational experience to put all of that in and be there with all of those people trying to figure it out. And it was really interesting because it seemed every time we went out, every season we went out, the sea surface looked the same, but the ocean below the surface was different. Every time we went, we couldn't find the same fish. Where'd they go? Why aren't they here? They used to do this. They used to be predictable. And we had trouble finding them. And it was that curiosity, that dilemma, that led me to university and said, well, I need to learn more about oceanography and fisheries and ecology. There are things that I want to know about here. And it seemed like temperature, sea temperature, had something to do with it, but we didn't know. And that mystery took me to the university. Yes? Thank you. So, who remembers the 60s? Yeah, I think there's quite a few. There are a few folks that don't, right? Well, it was a decade of rapid, profound transformation for a lot of people. There were a lot of changes in civil rights and social upheaval and historic achievements in space exploration and environmental protection. I enjoyed an adventurous decade through creativity and exploring the unknown. Earned a couple of degrees in biology at San Diego State University. I trained and worked as a national park ranger in the mountains of California and the Virgin Islands, and served on an aquanaut team for Project Tektite, and supervised a U.S. Army medical laboratory in diagnostic virology, and all of that in the shadow of the Golden Gate Bridge. So there were a lot of things going on in the 60s. Now I've done it. Too many buttons. There we go, back, forward, there. Sorry about that. So at university, I found the emerging field of ecology especially exciting because it studies how living organisms interact with each other and with their environments. And that was kind of the way I saw the ocean when we were out in the fishing boats, and I was trying to figure out why things were where they were and what was going to happen to them. But it also broadened my understanding and my curiosity about the world beyond fish and fishing. And I saw mountains and volcanoes and all of those kinds of things. And I said, wow, this is really cool. So during the summer break, university, I applied for a job as a park ranger and thought I'd try that, take my newfound knowledge of ecology and apply it to conservation of nature. So that career began in 1964 in Lassen Volcanic National Park. It's about 180 miles north of Sacramento. How many, do you people know Lassen? How many people have been there? Yeah, there's nodding, yeah. This is not a very well-known park. It's a very small park. And yet, it's a mini Yellowstone. It has lots of hydrothermal areas. It has 10,500 foot exploding volcanoes, right? It's only 170 square miles, compared to Yellowstone or Yosemite, which are thousands of square miles. Lassen's a small place. But it's got all of those hot springs and fumaroles and wilderness forests of pine and fir and hemlocks all the way up to the tree line and beyond. Geologic formations everywhere, over 100 lakes, some of them 100 feet deep. I managed to get to the bottom of a whole bunch of them to see what was going on down there, right? So there was a whole world to explore there. And there was only a staff of 24 people there. And in the summertime, that doubled, so there'd be 50 people. But still, everybody got to know everybody else's job. So it was a great place to learn the business and be able to participate in it. I mean, you go to Yellowstone or Everglades even, and you've got 700 people running around, and they've got so many things going on, it'd take you 10 years just to find out who they all are. But Lassen had it. So it was a really great place to learn that park stewardship is really a very complex task. It's way beyond just protecting parks from people and people from parks. And often that's a perception. That's what the park staff does. And there's a lot more going on there. So as I was completing my graduate studies, I inquired about a job as a park biologist. I thought, these guys need some science in this place. We could do a better job if we used the tools that I'd gotten at the university. And they told me they already had 6. They had 170 parks, so that they thought that was plenty of biologists. And I have to admit, I was really disappointed, for about 24 hours. And the reason I changed my mind is that they called the next day and offered me a job as a ranger in Virgin Islands National Park. And I said, now that sounds like an adventure. And at that age, in that stage of my career, I thought, that's what I'm looking for, exciting things to do. So I went down there. I didn't even know where it was when I accepted the job. It took me a little while to figure it all out. After I arrived on the island of St. John, the park began to host the United States' first civilian man-in-the-sea project. It was called Tektite, Tektite 1. And they were going to put a research station on the bottom of the ocean, and aquanauts were going to live in it for 60 days and see if that was a better way of doing research. You could get more bottom time, you could go out day and night. You know what a hassle it is to stage night dives from the surface and find your way back again. But when you live on the bottom, it's just the neighborhood. You wander around down there. The only constraint is you can't go to the surface, right? But this was a really exciting sort of thing. So all of a sudden, I found myself an aquanaut on Project Tektite, and I was on a protected reef in the park and mapping coral reefs and studying lobster ecology and keeping track of what was going on 24/7 on the bottom of the ocean. Sometimes you just can't tell. Are we still here? I didn't do that, did I?
Now it's big. We're going to have to get Vita's superhero cape.
Ooh.
You'll unplug and replug and see if that works. So this system is brand new as of today, again. So apologies for the work-throughs, but hopefully that should do something. Still closer. Let me try one thing. One second. No, it's a PowerPoint just crashed.
I can do some stand up in the meantime. Look at me go.
No, pick somewhere. It's further down. There you go. Nope. Back up. Yeah, let's start at Tektite. We'll start and end there. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're back. All right. And in case you can't tell, this is kind of repurposed at the last minute to do this, and I'm really enjoying it, and I hope that we can make this work for you. And I put this slide in because you guys all know about diving. Most of the time when I'm talking to people about national parks, not so much knowledge about diving and what it is, right? You know what saturation diving is. We were diving on a nitrogen mix, right? For the first time, nobody knew how that worked. It was really cutting edge kinds of things, and it was a lot of fun. And the research topics included, the aquanauts were just guinea pigs. NASA was paying most of the freight because they were getting ready to put people in space, and they were going to be isolated, and they wanted to know, what do people with real jobs do when they can't go home at night, right? And these guys living on the bottom of the ocean can't go home at night, and they're motivated. The Navy was putting people on the bottom of the ocean, and they'd give them a bag full of nuts and a bag full of bolts and send them out and say, how many can you put together? And then they'd come in freezing cold in San Diego in that cold water, and then they'd send them back out in 2 hours and see how many they could take apart. Well, they were not motivated to do that kind of work, and they said, we need some guys that don't know that we're fooling with them. They're really interested in tagging lobsters and seeing where they go and what they eat and what eats them, right? And so that was part of what Tektite was all about, as well as finding out the effects of being saturated with nitrogen. And it was cheaper, than helium, and that's what Jacques Cousteau did with his Conshelf series. He put people out, but they were breathing helium. And you know how hard French is to understand with air? Well, with the helium, it's impossible. My French teacher doesn't like that joke. Anyway, by the time I had finished, I skipped the whole thing there. All right. So anyway, got through all of that. That was Tektite. It was a really interesting experience. And about 4 days after we got up on the surface and started to run around and talk to people about what we had learned and make plans for the other next year and the years after that, I got a draft notice, and I spent the next 2 years in the U.S. Army. So it's just like COVID, right? For the present generation, it was 2 years hiatus. You don't get to do what you thought you were going to do. What can you do with the cards you've been dealt, right? So we moved on. So by the time I'd finished with my Army career, in quotes, the park superintendent that I had worked for in the Virgin Islands had moved to South Florida, and he was administering Everglades and Dry Tortugas National Parks. And they were just putting Biscayne National Park online. So there were 3 marine parks. He said, I need to have a marine biologist. And he called me up just as I was getting out of the Army. And so I took the job. I came to South Florida, spent 10 years here, working in those parks, developed strategies for trying to sustain fisheries in the parks. When I arrived in 1970, 71, there was commercial fishing going on in Everglades. They were taking 2,000 tons of fish out of the park every year. Somehow we missed a concept when it came to fish and aquatic animals in parks. Everything else in the parks are connected. Protected. It's the pine cones and the mushrooms and, the needles and the minerals, the crystals, and everything is protected. But when it comes to fish, put them in the frying pan. And there's something wrong with this, and we have to fix that. So that was one of my tasks, was to begin to talk about, well, what's going on here and how does that work? And what can we do about it? So I spent a lot of time here in South Florida studying spiny lobsters and trying to figure out how we could sustain those populations more effectively, stone crabs and the game fish. And so we worked on those kinds of things. We also had the more traditional wildlife things like the loggerhead sea turtles and stuff like that. And of course, the number one thing for South Florida and nature was the restoration of the Everglades and trying to figure out how that might work, what's going on here. It was to take it to the next level after we've decided that it's not a swamp, but it's a river of grass and it has value, brings fresh water to all of the people of South Florida, and it has value, so let's do that. And so we were starting to lay the foundation for the comprehensive Everglades restoration project. Well, after a few years, I had helped establish a park science program here, and I became an acting director of the National Park Service research program. And when I arrived in South Florida, I became the fourth scientist working in the South Florida parks. When I left, there were 102 scientists working in the research program and 100 other people putting that knowledge to work, implementing invasive plant control, managing fisheries, and putting limits on what was taken, and trying to make the stuff that we had learned make a difference and connect people to these places. And you all know more than I do now how important that is and how much is spent. And you know, you've made a huge difference in the way people view the Everglades and people in that relationship. Go left. Oh, I'm encroaching on the image. Sorry. So, but one of the things that I'd say, South Florida never lacked for interesting adventures, which was one of the reasons, you know, I ended up in the Virgin Islands. And adventure was one of the things I wanted to do. I wanted to discover what was going on. That's what scientists do. Scientists make a living exploring new places, new ideas. So one weekend in May, the ranger down in Key Largo, not too far from here, called me up and said, one of the guide fishermen just told me there's a fish bigger than his boat thrashing around in Florida Bay. You want to go look at it? And I said, sure, I'd rather do that and cut the lawn. So I went down and I spent 2 days with this young female whale shark, teaching her to turn right and left. You know, it's kind of like a mule, gee and ha. And I found that I could get her to respond eventually. And so she was stuck on a mud bank. And eventually I got her out in the open in some of the basins, and I could direct her. I'm not sure direct is the right word, entice her to go in a different direction. And we finally, after 2 days, got her back out into the Gulf of Mexico off of Cape Sable. Where do you get a job where you get to do fun stuff? Huh? I spend a day walking around on the back of a whale shark. And you know, there was a day we were out at the Dry Tortugas, had a bunch of people out there. We were trying to get some long-term studies started out there. And the Coast Guard people at the light on, that was a time when the light had a staff, called and said, there's a bunch of big whale-like things on the beach over here, and the tide's going out and they're going to die, and we're spraying them down with our fire hose, but every time we get close to them, they get all yippy, and we're afraid to get in the water with them. So we went over to take a look, and sure enough, there were nearly 30 false killer whales, and the largest male in the group had gone all the way up on the beach. We couldn't move him. He was too big, and he died after a few hours. And the rest of them hung around for a couple of days, and we had to get them off that beach before they all died, so I just walked in with them, and they were just like puppy dogs. If you were calm, they were calm. When the coasties went in, they were really nervous, because these things are all teeth on one end. And they're really big and strong, but they were very calm. So we spent another 2 days, spent the whole weekend down there in 1976 with these sorts of things. So that's nature. You get to do that sort of thing, and that's the fun of being a scientist in a black screen again. Sorry.
That's okay.
See you again.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's fish.
All right. All right. Jeez, this is going to solve their problems. What I discovered after just a few months was that meant that one day each week I'd go out with one of the teams and get in their way and keep them from getting something done, because they kept having to explain to me what they were doing and why they were doing it. And it wasn't very satisfactory. And I thought, maybe it's time I could make better use of my time if I went somewhere else. So I owed a fellow park ranger a favor. He had been my first mentor at Lassen. He was now the superintendent at Channel Islands National Park, and he was facing the same issues that we had faced at Everglades, with tons and tons of fish and kelp even being harvested in the park, and he couldn't do anything about it because he didn't have enough knowledge. He didn't have the information he needed to know what the consequences were going to be and what could be done about it. And he said, I need to have some science. What do I need to do? And I said, we need to start down this road kind of the medicine. What do you got? We're going to diagnose this. We have to know inventories and monitoring and looking at change over time. We would come up with tools for repairing the damage. So I had an opportunity with a new law that created that park in 6 of the islands off the coast of Southern California between Santa Barbara and San Diego, to go out and begin to learn how to do that in a better way. So I took a position as a research scientist at UC Davis. The Park Service had a cooperative studies unit there, and I was able to then work for a few years doing that. So I got back into the water again and got to use all the new technology that was coming along. We were just putting video cameras in housings that were small enough that you could use. We could begin to film fish transects instead of having to record everything on slates. And all of the things that you guys know a lot about, we were just beginning to explore at that time. The Park Service had finally decided that science was a reasonable investment, that they really needed to have it. And we were able to convince them that the monitoring program we designed for the Channel Islands was something that was important for all of the parks in the system. And so we rolled that out for 270 parks. And it was a big change in the way that people viewed parks. So it was a lot of fun. The next 10-year period, this idea, the concept of marine protected areas, finally emerged as an alternative to species-based management. One of the problems we had in the water and stuff that was out of sight and out of mind was that it kept going back to the same old things that weren't working for us, that we were trying to break these systems into little component pieces, and we're going to manage the lobsters over here and the stone crabs over there and the tarpon down there, and not understand how they're all connected to each other. We needed to look at the whole systems. So we thought, well, we need to summarize what we have learned about all of these places over the last 50 years. So we sat down and looked at our history with the last 100 years, the first 100 years, we've called it, the first 100 years of marine parks. And from that, we were able to build new programs. After leaving federal service, at that time I had now 50 years in this business, and I thought it was time to move on and give some other people a chance. And I began to look at what we do next, and found that what you're doing here with REEF is what we need to do next. And there's a group of citizens up in the San Juan Islands, the part of the Salish Sea. It's the inland waters between British Columbia and Olympia, Washington, Puget Sound and some other things in there. But the Salish people had been there for tens of thousands of years, and they needed some help there. And interestingly enough, the University of Washington said, no, we don't want to do that. We do other things. And so the folks were disappointed. That was their hometown university, and they ended up at Davis in the School of Veterinary Medicine, because the veterinary medicine group was working with gorillas in Africa and ecosystems. I scared it when I said Africa. Anyway, so just be patient. It'll come back. Yeah, interesting. So I started working again, following the same pattern that we had used around the country and all the dive magazines and got everybody to do it. And I said, well, we're going to do this. National Fishing Week's always the first full week in June. I said, that's a little too early. The diving's not that great in a lot of places. Let's put it in July, and over the 4th of July, so we'll have the Great American Fish Count. Well, that was not a bad idea, and we got a good response. Lots of people did it. But I also got a raft of letters from people in the Bahamas and in Jamaica and all over the Caribbean and in the South Pacific and said, I want to do it too, but I'm not in America. And I said, well, of course you can do it. Well, anybody can do this, you know. So we kept the acronym and just called it the Great Annual Fish Count. So that's what we started doing. And independently, you know the history of this place and the people, we're doing it even better, right? And I said, that's what we really should be doing, is every day we're doing this, because this kind of a social group together that has power, has strength, resilience, and you support each other. And you can even afford to hire staff to do this better, right? Slowing things down.